Nutrition, Chapter 5, Lipids. As we look at lipids, we know that the other name is fats. We have the triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols as the classes of lipids we'll be learning about. Our key fatty acids, then, the building blocks, are considered either short chain when they have 2 to 4 carbons, medium 6 to 10 carbons, and then your long chain fatty acid is 12 or more carbons. As we look at a couple of things with chemistry, organic chemistry, the scientific naming of fatty acids counts carbons at the acidic end, or the COOH end. The alpha carbon is the COOH. The omega carbon is the CH3. And in nutrition, a little differently than we count from the location of the omega carbon, or the CH3, in getting the number that we have. We know that fat is an essential nutrient in the diet. They contribute to flavor and texture. If you've ever bought real lean meat, we know that sometimes it doesn't taste as good, or it doesn't cook up as well either. Many of our fat-free foods really aren't any lower in calories than regular food. They just add more sugar or another product in there to make it taste good to replace the fats. With fats, we know that they're good for you in moderation. They add a lot of balance and variety to our diet. As we look at the lipids, we know they're organic molecules. They dissolve easily in organic solvents. And as I said, the three classes of lipids are your triglycerides, and they are stored as adipose tissue. Our phospholipids are only about 2%, and they're in both animal and plant products. And then the sterols is a very, very small percentage. And we know that cholesterol is a sterol, and cholesterol has many important functions in the body, including making sex hormones, our adrenal hormones such as cortisol, vitamin D, and bile salts. As we look at the fatty acid building blocks, we know that a saturated fatty acid is fully loaded or saturated with hydrogen. Unsaturated or desaturated fatty acids, then the carbons are connected by a double bond, and it has 2 fewer bonds holding that hydrogen, so it's not fully saturated with hydrogen. Food fats mixture of fatty acid types, the more unsaturated a fatty acid is, the lower its melting point. A saturated fatty acid has a higher melting point. So when we look at margarine versus butter, margarine is softer when you go to take it out of the tub in your refrigerator. It's more of an unsaturated fatty acid, where lard is very saturated and has a much higher melting point in cooking. When we look at our geometric and positional isomers, then we know that the C, or the cis fatty acid, is bent. The trans is the hydrogens are moving across from one another. It's commonly found in things like margarine or your hydrogenated fats, and they are a straight line bond. And then our hydrogenation is adding hydrogen to those double bonds. It's a chemical process that we use, and it raises the low density lipoprotein, making the product last longer on the shelf. So when you see something that has a very long shelf life, it probably has a lot of hydrogenation in order for it to have that strong or longer shelf life. In looking at essential fatty acids, we know that those are the fatty acids with the double bond before the 9th carbon. And non-essential fatty acids, there's no double bond before the 9th carbon. And as we look then at conjugated linoleic acid, such as kangaroo meat, it's grass-fed beef, and mutton are also that source of fats. Our fatty acids, then, when we look at the different types of fatty acids, you've probably heard some of these talked about in literature before, because people talk about different fish that has omega fatty acids, the omega-3 and omega-6, and these are just in relation to where that omega carbon falls with the double bond for that carbon. The key building blocks, then, as I said, non-essential and essential fatty acids. With non-essential, the body can make them. Essential, it's essential or important that we consume them in the diet, because we are not able to make them. Some of our key fatty acid with building blocks, as I said, these are crucial chemical mediators. When we look at the influence on the inflammatory process, a lot of people will eat some foods that are very high in omega-6 or omega-3 fatty acids because they are known to help with decreasing inflammation in the body. They help with blood vessel dilation and constriction, and also with blood clotting. Our triglycerides serve as an energy source. They help with insulation and protection. Our triglycerides also are fat-soluble vitamins such as A, D, E, and K, and make foods taste good. They add flavor, texture, and calories. They make baked goods taste good and tender, and also add moisture to them. We know that glycerol is the backbone, or that green part in the picture, of your triglyceride, and then off of that glycerol is your 3 fatty acids. Triglyceride is an ester, an OH, or alcohol and fatty acid, and the ester forms when the hydrogen and oxygen from the fatty acid's carboxyl group, the COOH, combine with the hydrogen from the hydroxyl group, and that reaction then makes water, or H2O, and that figure is in your book to demonstrate that for you. We know that the function of a triglyceride is dietary and stored fat. About 60% of your resting energy needs are supplied by this, and we know that fat is the preferred fuel for muscle tissue at rest. Glucose, or your carbohydrates, is the preferred fuel for the brain. As far as an energy reserve, we know infants and young children should not ever be put on a low-fat diet unless prescribed by a physician. So when children at age 1 start drinking cow's milk, they are on whole milk because they need the fats for brain development. When you get to be older and you don't need that neurological development in the brain, then you can take children down to 2%, 1%, and eventually down to skim milk. We know fat is stored inside of fat cells, and they're called adipocytes, or adipose tissue, and some people have more fat storage than others. And we know that fat then serves as an insulator. About 15 to 30% of a person's body weight can come from that, and the visceral fat then is around organs. It helps cushion and shield the organs, and your brain is about 60% fat. Our triglycerides in food then, as I said, the omega-3 fatty acids are things that are good for you. Soybeans, flaxseed. Many people are using flaxseed in yogurt, ground up and put into foods, because we know that it helps lower cholesterol and it adds a lot of flavor to foods, as well as having a healthy property. Our omega-6 fatty acids are your vegetable oils, nuts, and seeds. When we look at the commercial processing of fats, then we know all fats exist in a combination with other macronutrients, and generally they occur along with starches in plant foods and proteins in your animal foods. When we look at some of the different terms, we have the term hydrolysis, which is destroying the hydrolytic enzymes and removes most of the free fatty acids. As we look at oxidation, we know that's when that fat comes in contact with air and oxygen, and that's what causes exposure to light, increases the rate of oxidation, and shortens the shelf life of many of your foods. And then your hydrogenation, as I said earlier, is the breaking of those double bonds, adding in the hydrogen to make something more solid or better for baking. And you know that's true if you've ever bought the margarine that is low in fat or light, the light kind, and your cookies will not come out. They will kind of just run or slide on the plate because of the difference in the types of fat that is used in that. When we look at the triglycerides in food, then, as I said, the hydrolysis is destroying that hydrolytic enzyme and removing most of the free fatty acids. Your oxidation, is increased exposure to light and has a negative effect on the shelf life. and hydrogenation is adding in more of that hydrogen for us. Our phospholipids then, as we can see, we have the glycerol with 2 fatty acids and that phosphate group, or that blue round thing on our diagram. Similar to triglycerides, they have the glycerol and fatty acids, but the structure is different. These phospholipids are made by the body, not from the diet, and we know then that when we have food sources such as egg yolk, liver, soybeans, and peanuts, they're often lost when the foods are processed and we don't get the benefit or the health part of that. In looking at our cholesterol or sterols, we know that the function is to help that cell membrane, especially nerve and brain tissue. And as I said, small children need more fat in their diet as a result of that immature nervous and brain tissue that they have. The cholesterol is a precursor to other substances. As I said, we make our hormones. Our vitamin D is synthesized or made from cholesterol, and our bile acids then are emulsified dietary fats. Your cholesterol is made in the liver, and that's where you hear people say, I'm on a very low fat diet. I have followed the diet my physician wants me to follow, and I still have high cholesterol. Some people just genetically make more cholesterol in their liver, and there's nothing they can do as far as diet and otherwise to lower their cholesterol. And those are the people then that are sometimes put on cholesterol lowering medications, the statins at bedtime, or certain dietary changes that the physician may recommend, trying to counteract that synthesis in the liver. About 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day is made, and we know that naturally cholesterol, if we eat it or consume it, is coming from our animal foods or animal sources, especially your organ meat. So if you have somebody that eats liver and onions, they're going to get a lot of cholesterol in that meal. We know an egg is about 212 milligrams of cholesterol, and a lot of people have started going to egg whites to avoid the cholesterol that you obtain from an egg yolk. There is some relationship with atherosclerosis, and we know then that with the sterols, the hydrocarbons with multiple ring structures are noted as you see in the diagram in this picture. Low cholesterol levels ideally would be about 160 milligrams per deciliter or less, and low cholesterol is associated with some of the health issues that we have today, immunity, strokes. Our sterile hormones, important to know in the healthcare field, things like progesterone, which helps maintain a healthy pregnancy. Your glucocorticoids or cortisol is helping to break down fats and proteins. Mineral corticoids is your aldosterone. It helps maintain your blood pressure and fluid balance. And your androgens and estrogens, which are your male and female hormones that we have in the body. As we look then at the digestion and absorption, it starts in the mouth and in the digestion unit. We'll get into this in more detail. Most of them are in the duodenum and the jejunum, where they are absorbed and digested. We know that fats in the bloodstream peak in about 3 to 5 hours, and so if you're going to have a blood draw, they want you to fast at least 12 hours, because in about 10 hours is when the fats are cleared from the diet. And so we fast for 12 hours before any blood work to give us a better reading or a more accurate account of what we have. When we look at the breakdown, we know that cholecystokinin stimulates the gallbladder to contract, and bile then is released to break down the fats. We know pancreatic lipase helps break down fats, and that's breaking off of one fatty acid at a time. And our absorption of fat, when it is not appropriate because we don't have the bile or the pancreatic lipase, may result in a condition called steatorrhea or fatty stools. It's when you look in the stool, it looks like it has a fat ring around it, and that usually is a clue that there is problems with the digestion and absorption of the fats. We know that the bile has a recycling pathway. And lastly, as we look then at the digestion and absorption of that, the chylomicrons are large lipoprotein particles that are formed in the intestinal cells after the absorption of dietary fats. And when there's a lot of fiber in plant sterols, that can affect the absorption as well. This ends our PowerPoint. Have a great day.